Okay, so let's start with chapter 15, the nervous system, the special senses. So in AMP1, we went through the first four chapters of the nervous system. We had basically the histology and how the individual cells worked. In the first chapter, we had the spinal cord and the spinal nerves, the brain and the cranial nerves, and then the integration of the both of them and how they all kind of worked together. So, forgive me. I'm still kind of sick, so you're going to hear me probably sniffle and swallow because, not that you want to know this, but my sinuses are draining. So, please forgive me. Okay. So, the special senses are considered the special senses because, unlike the general senses, they are in really specific areas of the body. So you see with your eyes, you don't see with your elbow, you don't see with your knee, you don't see with your fingers. But if I were to ask you where you can feel touch, that's on your head, your hands, your arms, your legs, your back, your front. So special senses are one location and have really specific types of receptors that respond in really specific types of ways. So, the quick outline of the chapter, we've got olfaction, we've got gustation, the visual system, hearing and balance, and the effects of aging on the special senses. So, what are the special senses? Well, there's a sense of smell, which happens in your nose. Sense of taste happens on your tongue and your throat. Sight, eyes, hearing and balance both take place in your ears. That's why when you get an ear infection, it tends to make you feel dizzy because it actually affects that balance organ in your ears. So we're going to start with olfaction. Olfaction is just a very, very fancy way of saying smell. Okay, so when you hear the word olfaction, all it means is smell. So looking at the nasal cavity, okay, so you can see the nasal cavity in the picture. In the superior region of the nasal cavity, give me 1 second. In the superior region of the nasal cavity up here, in AP1, you learned the ethmoid bone in the skull. And in the ethmoid bone, you had the crista galli, which was kind of that sail in the middle, but you also had those olfactory foramina, and they were little teeny tiny holes, because remember, foramen means hole. So when you look at this, you'll notice that I've got these nerves here that are coming down, right? These little nerve endings. Those olfactory foramina are there so that these little nerve endings can actually come up to where you've got your olfactory bulb. Let me erase that so you can see it better. So in the superior region of the nasal cavity, in the upper region of the nasal cavity, you have up here the olfactory epithelium. Now remember, olfaction, olfactory, smell, okay? So you've got the olfactory epithelium. What's epi? It's above. Usually when we talk about epithelium, we say that it's a covering. Well, this is covering the upper region of your nasal cavity. The olfactory epithelium is specifically made up of 3 types of cells. You've got supporting cells, you've got basal cells, and you've got olfactory neurons. Now, something that you're going to notice with all of the special senses, all of them kind of have the same makeup. They've got supporting cells, they've got basal cells, and then they've got the cells that actually do the work. So the supporting cells are exactly what they sound like. They're not sensory. They're there to actually protect and help the cells that are doing the work, in this case, the olfactory neurons. So if you look at the picture here, see all these little pink cells here? These little pink cells are the supporting cells. You can kind of think of them like nannies. Their job is basically to protect and help the olfactory neurons. The basal cells are these guys here. See the little red triangles? Basal cells are the ones that actually replace the olfactory neurons when they die. They do kind of have a finite lifespan, especially if there's damage to them. Think about it for a second. If you've ever, known anybody who's been in a fire, that can actually singe the top of your nose because the heat of the flames and the soot and everything else, it can damage these cells. Well, if these cells get damaged, the ones that are actually doing the job, I really don't want to be scentless. I don't want to not be able to smell for the rest of my life. Well, as long as the cells down here stay intact, they'll actually replace any of the olfactory neurons that were damaged. That's what the basal cells do. As basal cells, they are not sensory. But if they are needed, they will replace the olfactory neurons. So the olfactory neurons, let's talk about those. See the purple cells here? Okay. They look like they have little spiked hairdos, except they're upside down. These are the olfactory neurons. I want you to also notice that there's kind of this gray line right here. Can you see that? That is supposed to represent mucus because the inside of your nose is covered in mucus. And there's actually a really specific reason for that, which I will get to. But we have approximately 10 million olfactory neurons in our nose, up here in our olfactory epithelium. Their axons project through the olfactory foramina, which you can see, those little holes I was talking about, the foramina that I was talking about, you've got the axons trailing through here to get down to where the epithelium is. I said that completely wrong, didn't I? Yeah, I did. Okay, rewind. The olfactory neurons have axons that go from these cells up here to the olfactory bulb. That was what I meant to say. Sorry. Okay. So you have to remember that I'm picking up signal in here because it's coming up my nose. So these cells are specifically designed to react to the chemicals that make up scent and then send signals up to the olfactory bulb, which in turn sends signals up to the brain. Okay, so looking at the olfactory neurons a little bit closer. So literally, this is just this picture down here blown up. So you've got the dendrite. Okay, the dendrites actually extend into the epithelial surface, onto the outer surface that is inside of your nose. And like I said, you can see that gray line, okay? Those hairs in the olfactory neurons are actually kind of stuck in that mucus, okay? So the little bulby part that you can see here kind of looks like the top of a light bulb. We actually call those the olfactory vesicles. And the olfactory vesicles, which kind of look like this, have these olfactory hairs coming off of them. These are actually cilia, okay? And they are embedded inside of this mucus film here, okay? So, odorants are the chemicals that we describe as activating these olfactory neurons. So, you know how we have deodorant? That's so that we don't smell. Well, odorants are the chemicals that cause us to recognize smell. So, when an odorant is floating around, okay, and it's floating around, it dissolves in this mucus. And when it dissolves in the mucus, eventually it will bind to transmembrane odorant receptors. So what does trans mean? Trans means across. So transmembrane means across the membrane. So it's a receptor that goes across the membrane. In other words, it's sticking out on one end and causes effects inside. So let's take a look at that. So we've got 1,000 different transmembrane odorant receptors that can be produced and react to their own odorant. So we have kind of 1,000 options. Thus, the intracellular pathways are going to be GPCRs. Now, if you don't remember GPCR from AP1, hang on one second. GPCR means G protein coupled receptor. Now, remember in AP1, I talked about Gru from Despicable Me, and I said that Gru doesn't do anything. He always sends his minions out to do his work. That's what the GPCR is. Here's my cell membrane. Here's my GPCR. Okay, and he's got 3 little minions: alpha, beta, and gamma. And if I've got something that's binding to this membrane, this GPCR doesn't actually do anything specific. It only says, here, I'm giving you instructions, and then the minions go, and they're the ones who go into the cell and do something. So when we talk about GPCRs, automatically think of Gru in Despicable Me. That's just a quick overview of what a GPCR is. Let me erase. Okay, so the GPCRs have their own unique reactions, basically producing their own unique smells. We may have 1,000 different transmembrane odorant receptors, but depending on the combination produced with how many, let's say I activate 100 out of the 1,000, the combination that is produced can basically give about 4,000 different smells that a person can experience. There are only really 7 primary classes of odors that have been proposed. One is camphorous. Camphorous is the smell of mothballs. It's kind of almost like a spicy smell. Vicks. Vicks is a good example of camphorous. If you've ever smelled camphophenique, the what do they call it? Not antibiotic. The antiseptic liquid, that's camphorous. That's what it smells like. So another one is musky. If you've ever smelled men's cologne definitely has a musk smell to it. It's, sorry. I promise I don't have COVID. Okay, you know that kind of cologne-y, musky smell? Floral. You want to take a guess what that smells like? Correct, flowers. Pepperminty, which I really didn't think was an honest to goodness word, and I looked it up and it is. So pepperminty is another smell. Ethereal. Okay, I think ethereal, I think of angels and fairies. But ethereal apparently is basically the smell of fresh pears. So if you're standing somewhere and you smell fresh pears, know that there's an angel next to you. Just kidding. But ethereal apparently is equivalent to the smell of fresh pears. Pungent. If you've ever been around somebody who's been working outside and they come up to try and give you a hug, you know what pungent smells like. And putrid. Don't lie, everybody here has not taken out the trash for too long at one point or another, and when you open it, you go, "Whoa," which I just did today. Don't throw cat food cans away in the trash can in the kitchen. That's all I'm saying. Take them outside. So, threshold. The threshold for odorants is very low. So, what's threshold? Threshold is kind of the all or none point. How much does it take to get you to realize something is there? Okay, so it doesn't take much for you to smell something. And if you think about it evolutionarily, that actually makes sense, because I want to know that there is a fire way before the fire is in front of me. If there's just a hint of smoke in the air and I smell that and go, what? It makes me, pick my head up and pay attention. So when I think of threshold, because most people have seen this or heard this at some point in their life, if somebody says they have a low threshold for pain, hold for pain, what does that mean? Doesn't take much before they're screaming. So if you see low threshold, you know it doesn't take much before it picks it up and goes, you're smelling something. Now, if something has a high threshold, if somebody has a high threshold for pain, what does that mean? It takes a lot before they say ouch, right? So if you don't remember what this means, go back to that idea of high threshold for pain or low threshold for pain. It'll kind of help get your brain back in order. Okay, we've got low specificity receptors. What's specificity? Specific, right? In other words, key A only fits into lock A. Well, with low specificity, key A may fit into locks A, B, C, and D. Key B might fit into E, F, G, H, I. There's not necessarily one-to-one matching here. So something like spearmint might cause my pepperminty transmembrane odorant receptor to fire, as well as peppermint. Okay, the entire epithelial surface is replaced every 2 months. Every 2 months, you get new odorant receptors. And like I said in the previous, well, maybe not previous, maybe before that slide, those basal cells are the ones that replace the olfactory neurons. So we're replacing them every 2 months. Why? Because we do damage to our nose. That's why. And I'm not necessarily talking about just, being in a fire. Just everyday life can do damage if you're not careful. Okay, so let's look at the physiological process of how this actually works. So when it comes to the transmembrane odorant receptor, here's my GPCR. Okay, there's GRU. Here are his minions, gamma, beta, and alpha. So our first kind of big player in this is the GPCR. That's the first player. We also have an enzyme called adenylate cyclase. Okay, adenylate cyclase, just based on the name, is going to turn something into a circle. Cyclase, circle. And we have an ion channel that is gated. In other words, it has the ability to close or to open. So we've got 3 major players. We've got the GPCR, we've got the enzyme adenylate cyclase, and we've got our gated channel, which should be a 3, sorry. Notice that without binding. So the odorant isn't bound yet. In other words, I'm not reacting to anything. Adenylate cyclase isn't doing anything, and this channel is closed. So what happens when a neuron fires? Positive ions rush in and we get an action potential. Well, here, nothing is rushing into this cell. Since nothing is rushing into the cell, nothing is happening here. Okay? Now, the odorant binds. Remember what I said about Gru here. Gru doesn't do anything. He sends his minions. In this case, alpha binds to adenylate cyclase. When it binds to the adenylate cyclase, it's like turning it on. Okay, here it's off. Up on the top, it's off because nothing's binding. But here, it's now turned on. What does it do? It takes adenosine triphosphate and turns it into cyclic AMP. So it takes a linear molecule like this and it turns it into a circular molecule like this. Cyclic AMP then goes and binds to this channel. Remember, it's gated, right? And when this is off, the gate is closed. Notice that there's nothing binding to it, right? So now that we've got something binding to it, it opens. And now these ions can rush into my cell. What happens when positive ions rush into a neuron? You get an action potential, or it depolarizes, which basically means you get an action potential. Okay? So the olfactory neurons, we've got these odorant receptors, the olfactory neurons, and they are coming up through our olfactory foramina to reach the olfactory bulb. This is one of the cranial nerves that you learned in AP1 when you were learning the cranial nerves. So the olfactory neurons connect to the olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb then becomes something called the olfactory tract. In other words, it becomes a path, okay? Now, you've got 3 areas in the brain where this goes. It goes to the lateral olfactory area, which is number 3 down here. This is your conscious perception of smell. Okay, I know I am smelling something. So that's where that's happening. The medial olfactory area, which is over here, okay, number 4, is the visceral and emotional reactions to that smell. So my mom has worn white diamonds since I was like 12 years old. It's been forever. So whenever I smell white diamonds, whether my mom is in the room or not, I kind of go, because it reminds me of my mom. Okay, that's an emotional reaction or a visceral reaction to a smell. Now, the third region is the intermediate olfactory area, which is number 5 up here. The intermediate olfactory area basically integrates the 2 previous areas. The one where I'm smelling something, and then the emotional and visceral responses to it. Now, axons from 5 actually also project down to modulate the neuronal signals from the olfactory bulb. So they actually come back this way and basically say, okay, we've smelled that enough. If you've ever noticed that you you tend to put like perfume on in the morning or use a specific type of body lotion because you like the way it smells, but after about 20-30 minutes, you don't smell it anymore. That's because of number 4 here. Your nasal cavity needs to be I guess, set to smell something new. And if your brain is so busy going, white diamonds, white diamonds, white diamonds, your brain isn't going to be able to key in on, I smell smoke. So after a while, there's a certain amount of, okay, I don't need to smell that anymore because I've been smelling it enough. Um, I guess you could call it gets used to it. There's actually a name for it, but of course I can't remember that right now, so we'll get to it eventually.